bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the rad groups of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more. All featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL. From the great one to the next one. From the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. My name is Jim Parsons. I'm here with hockeyreaders.com, typically covering the Edmonton Oilers and NHL news and rumors. We've got an interesting collection of people today. Brian couldn't join us, so he's not going to be on the show this week, but we do have Colton Pankiw, a regular with us for the Oilers. Colton, how are you?
I'm good, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing okay. As we record this, we're like 10 minutes removed from the Oilers losing their fifth game on the road. So it was a 2-3 record, 2 wins, 3 losses. Not so wonderful, especially considering their start, but they still got a decent record, so it could be worse. Julian Mongillo is with us as well. And Julian, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing a little better than you guys. At least 1-3-0 tonight, so I'll take that. But hopefully the Oilers can bounce back.
Yeah, no, I think they'll be all right. Although we'll have some stuff to talk about because this wasn't the prettiest effort that the Oilers have put forward. And Matthew Zator's with us. Matthew, for the first time joining us, he covers the Vancouver Canucks and is kind of, for anybody that doesn't know, our big time producer for most of these video shows. So Matthew's with us. Matthew, how are you?
Doing good.
Good.
Canucks aren't doing good, but I'm doing good.
Yeah, I know. There was a lot of news in Vancouver today in terms of the owners meeting with the GM and what are we going to do here? So it doesn't look like anything's coming imminently. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But we'll talk mostly about the Oilers tonight just simply because that's what this show is all about. But we figured bring you in outside perspective on what you're seeing from the Oilers because, you know, we watch them all the time. We're kind of biased. We like the Oilers a lot. And you're Vancouver, so you get the chance to watch from a different set of eyeballs. But tonight, it's a 5-2 loss, or when people watch this video, a 5-2 loss yesterday. Not pretty. It was not a good outing by the Oilers. The first period, again, didn't seem to start very well. Colton, what do you make of that? Like, the Oilers tend to have really rough starts. And even though they're, 10-3 now? Not very good first periods. It's been kind of their story so far this season. They seem to outscore teams at the end of the games. And they come back and is shooting sort of whatever back and forth, and they tend to win those games. But tonight didn't work out that way. Bad first period. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think we talked about it last show or a couple ago. It's not a good problem to be in. I think, especially once the games get tougher down the stretch, if they're just relying on having a hot finish to the game, it's not going to work out for them. Like you said, they came out slow. I thought that first goal by Koskinen was definitely one he should have had back. And I think that kind of put them behind the 8 ball right off the bat. In his defense, he did battle back and make some good saves, but that first goal going in like that is just it just kills a team.
Well, it's the knock on Koskinen, right? Like the typical first goal, first shot, week one trickles through, and he hasn't done that at all this season. Like, to his defense and to his credit, he's been very good this year, but that was his rep in the last couple of years, was that he does that all the time. Matthew, I'll run to you. What do you get, like, from the outside looking in for a guy that doesn't necessarily follow the Oilers as much as we do? What's the rep? We hear that everybody's like, oh, the Oilers just want to outshoot everybody. They want to outscore everybody. They don't play defense. They're winning because of the top 2 guys. Do you get the same feeling in Vancouver? Is that the outside perspective from your side of things too? Or do you think it's a little deeper than that?
I mean, yeah, obviously, Draisaitl and McDavid are scoring almost every game. When you look at the scoring, it's usually them. But for me, I'm seeing a lot more depth. Seeing that, guys like Hyman scoring Fogle and guys like that are scoring goals. But, the bigger guys, if McDavid and Draisaitl don't score most of the time, probably the Oilers aren't going to be winning. So I'd say probably they're more offense than defense. But from my perspective, I think they're a little better defensively this year. Just looking at, Duncan Keith and, CC, they seem to be fitting on pretty well. But overall, they're pretty much more offense than defense.
So if I'm hearing you right, are you saying that the rep with the Oilers that they might just be trying to outscore everybody is not necessarily a fair reputation?
I don't think it's fair. I think it's more true in previous years. This year, I don't think it's as much accurate.
Julian, what do you make of these first period starts? Because they've not been pretty. It's almost like the Oilers, even though Matthew says, from the outside, it might not be the fairest reputation, but it's almost like the Oilers come in every game and go, well, you know what? We can just turn on the Jets in the third period. Like we can just go and we'll get it back into the game if we have a really crappy start. And it doesn't always work out. It did not work out against the Jets, losing 5-2. So do the Oilers have to figure out a different mentality going into these games? Because the first periods, they suck. They're just not good. It's very rare in 13 starts that the Oilers have outplayed a team in the first. I don't know that I can remember the last game that they did where they outplayed the team in the first period. How big a problem is this?
Well, it looks like it's becoming more and more of a trend as we roll along here, right? Like it's a little bit concerning seeing it happen over and over. We saw it against Detroit, and we did talk about it on the show already that they look a little bit sluggish coming out of the gate, and looks like because of that swagger that they have that we've talked about, that they never feel like they're out of games. It's almost like they're relying on that run and gun style to say, you know what, we can come back from anything, so goals don't phase us anymore. And maybe they're getting a little bit, I think the word I'm gonna use is lackadaisical. They're just kind of going with the flow of the game, and whatever happens rather than trying to prevent goals from going in. And then that kind of puts the heat on Koskinen when all these goals are going in, and we've seen him struggle before in the past with allowing a bunch of goals, and then he kind of shuts down mentally maybe. And then it kind of just piles on from there where the fans start to get on him. And he's played well this year, but if your defense is not going to do the job, then and prevent goals from going in, you're relying on your run and gun offense, then I think it's going to become more and more of a struggle for them down the road.
There's a fine line between confidence and overconfidence, right? Like the Oilers are confident. That's great. To be confident and know that you're never out of a game, that you should and think you can beat any opponent that you play all year long. Like I honestly think the Oilers think, and they know they won't, but they think they could go 82-0. Like they think they're in every game, that they could beat every opponent. That confidence is good. But Colton, I'll ask you this. At what point is it overconfidence? Like when do you leave confident town and you go into overconfidence and you go, now we've really screwed ourselves because we came in so cocky and so confident and so whatever that we can do whatever we want at any time that we want, that you get yourself behind the eight ball like they did tonight because they were down 4-0.
Yeah, I mean, if it's that confident that they're just rolling into games thinking they don't have to take these teams serious, then that's way overconfident. They haven't done nearly enough as a team, accomplished nearly enough to have that type of confidence yet. Like they're a good regular season team, we know that, but they really haven't. This group hasn't really achieved anything outside of the regular season. So I think the starts are concerning. I think there's a few different elements of concern here. I think the power play is bailing them out a bit more than maybe.
I was just going to say that.
Like, 5-on-5, they really haven't been great so far this season. And I don't want to say I'm worried about it because they're talented enough to turn that around, but I think that's another pretty big concern with this group right now.
Matthew, what do you make of the power play? Like you mentioned Connor McDavid scoring all the time. He scored again. Well, didn't score 2 points again tonight. So has got a point in every game so far this season. And Draisaitl, I don't know what the exact numbers are. Maybe somebody can look it up while we're doing this, but he's on pace to get easy 50 and 50. Like I think he's got 15 goals now and like
17 after
games
tonight, I think.
Yeah, like crazy number of goals. Like I don't know that anybody will ever get 50 and 39. I can't even imagine that happening. But to say that he could get 50 and 50 is not out of the question. When you're watching from the outside, don't get to see the Oilers as often. What do you make of these two guys just being as dominant as they are?
It's amazing in the modern era because it's just you don't see it. I mean, you don't see two guys like this way back with Gretzky and Curry, scoring almost every game and getting points every game. It's pretty amazing to see. And I mean, it just seems like whenever they get on the power play, it's a given they're going to score a goal. So, I'd say these two guys they're probably good once in a generation type players, and it's pretty cool to see. And too bad they're playing for the Oilers, but
you're not the only. I mean, outside of Edmonton, you're certainly not the only person who says that. McDavid's had that on his whole career from people in Toronto. They were like, "Oh, he always wanted to be drafted by the Maple Leafs." Julian, I want to get each one of your takes on the John Tortorella comments because I'm pretty sure all of you heard them and everybody has been talking about it and what happened here. And I'd like to see if you agree or disagree. How much you might disagree if you do, whatever the case may be. So, Julian, I'll start with you. for those that don't know, John Tortorella basically was on ESPN and he said, look, Connor McDavid's going to have to change his game. There's no way that he can continue to get this team where they need to be if he's not going to play a more defensive game. Quit whining. He said, shut up and play. Now, I don't know how analytic you're going to be if you're on ESPN and you're telling people to shut up. If that's your big analysis, it's not exactly, very in-depth, whatever, from John Tortorella, but we're not really surprised that John Tortorella is going to say something like that, right? So what did you make of the comments from Tortorella? Did you agree, disagree? How much do you think that was out of line, if at all? What did you make of that?
Well, I think that's Tortorella being Tortorella, really. Just headlines in the newspaper, headlines on the internet. But overall, I just think that it's kind of crazy to say that, because the way I see it, McDavid compared to some other players in the league hasn't even compared to how much he complains to the amount of abuse he takes on the ice. So I think it's very contradicting, because out of all the players, I think McDavid's one of the best at just playing his game, and kind of putting the past, he'll out of, his own merit, go to the refs and say, hey, like, anytime now you want to call something from a little, game to game, but that's normal for players to have conversations like that with the refs, and they don't have to be Connor McDavid to go and do that. Right. So, Crosby early on in his career had to kind of learn that path. I think McDavid's already a step ahead of that, the way Crosby kind of handled himself early in his career. And he was known as more of a complainer, to the referees. So compared to Crosby, McDavid, I mean, they're both on the same career path, and McDavid's got a great trajectory as well. But I mean, I don't think that what Tortorella said was called for, really.
Colton, what did you make of the comments? I'll start with that. And then I wanted to get your take, because you saw the play tonight. I know you did, because I talked to you about this before. There was a lot of feedback after Tortorella made those comments that, okay, well, if McDavid's going to get, infringed upon and everything's going to be, he just needs to do the Messier, give an elbow, give a high stick, give a whatever, which we know you can't really do in today's NHL. It's just not going to fly anymore. But we saw a shade of that tonight, right? McDavid hits Pionk kind of with a high shoulder. I think Pionk sold it a little bit, but I still think it was absolutely a penalty. That's the response some people are suggesting that McDavid had, which I don't necessarily agree with, but he got a penalty for it. So he did what a lot of people are saying he could do, which is exactly proof that that's not going to fly. So one, what did you make of the Tortorella comments? And two, do you agree with people who say that McDavid should sort of take matters into his own hands, or does he just have to figure out a way to get the referees to start calling things when he's infracted upon?
I mean, in regards to Tortorella, like Julian said, that's just who he is. I don't really have a problem with it. He's obviously with ESPN for that reason. They know that he likes to give these kind of takes. He did it when he was coaching. He's always in the headlines, it seems like. So I don't have a problem with it. But I mean, to suggest that that's kind of the reason the Oilers haven't been successful is because of Connor McDavid. It's comical, really. But as far as tonight, taking it into his own hands, I don't think that's really what he has to do. I think he can just continue playing his game. I think we all agree here it's the team around him that's hasn't been up to par for the last few seasons, not him personally. And with tonight, I don't really think much of it. Like you said, it's a penalty. I don't think he was trying to get him up high by any means, and I don't think much of it.
I always laugh when people, because there's two real sides of the McDavid coin, right? There's people in Edmonton who will defend him pretty much no matter what. And then there's people outside of Edmonton who love to razz and troll people inside of Edmonton, everything about Connor McDavid. But I will say, when you watch that game tonight and you watch that play where Connor McDavid hits Neil Pionk, so there's a big scrum. All the Jets come over to McDavid. They're talking to him. Nobody's going to fight him, but they're just talking to him. And then Pionk comes over, skates beside him, and then just has this big poop-eating grin on his face. Like, I got you. Like, it's clear to me that some of these players know that you cannot call everything against Connor McDavid. Like, there's just no way the referees are going to do it. And so they can get away with a lot, as much maybe as they might get called for. So why wouldn't you try? Right. So they just drove him crazy to the point where he just decided to shoulder the guy, which is a penalty, but they'll take that trade off every time. Right. So for people who say, oh, McDavid's just dirty and whatever, he's probably frustrated to the point where you see plays like you see tonight. And then you get the guys in Winnipeg smiling because they know they got away with one. And he did sell that a little bit. Matthew, when you're outside the market and you hear people talk about, McDavid either dirty, McDavid take it into his own hands, McDavid needs to shut up, or he should just play. One, do you think he's probably the least penalized player for the player who should get the most calls. Is that wrong for people in Edmonton to think that? And two, what would you suggest McDavid do?
I mean, for me, I've never seen McDavid as being a complainer and guy like that. I just don't see that reputation from him. Taking things in their own hands, it's just for star players to do that. I feel like it's just, you'd rather them not do that because then they're getting put in the penalty box and that's not where you want them. I don't know. Bottom line, I've never actually seen McDavid being that type of player. Like to mention Crosby being a complainer, I saw that a lot early in his career. McDavid, I really haven't seen that from him. And as to what he should do if that happens, I mean, he should be talking to the refs. I mean, I think he is probably the least penalized guy for or against, guys taking penalties on him. He's so fast, and I'm sure guys hold him and hook him. And overall, I don't think that reputation is warranted.
Yeah, it's a sticky situation when you're that fast and you're that skilled, and because you can go to any Oilers game and find at least 2 times that McDavid should have drawn a penalty and doesn't. Like it's a reality for people who say that that's just a load of whatever. It's true. No matter what kind of a fan you are, Oilers or otherwise, it's true. Watch any game and it happens all the time. Julian,
I think even the refs, they kind of know that because he's so much better than everybody else, it's impossible for someone not to make an infraction on him in order to defend him. And I think they understand that. And because they see how good that power play is, they want to let the game run its course unless it's something blatant. Right. And I think that kind of plays into it as well. And just because their power play is so good, it's like a referee doesn't want to ruin a game and just give power plays at every little thing. But the way McDavid plays, they are penalties that need to be called. They're just not being called because of, the way they want to police the game or have that game, refereed.
And that was maybe one of the biggest problems I had with the Tortorella comments. One, I think it's a little hypocritical. Here's a guy, coach, that's known for complaining about pretty much everything, and he's calling Connor McDavid a complainer. But he suggests, I don't even know that he was watching the games, because if you look at those 2 playoff series against Winnipeg Jets last year, Chicago Blackhawks, the play-in series before, there's not a single penalty called against McDavid. So in 9 games, not one penalty on McDavid. That's unreal. I'm sorry, no matter what
that's
situation,
stretch.
It's just, even if we're saying, okay, only call the obvious ones, well, they clearly missed those 2 because they didn't call anything, right? So it's not like we're saying call every penalty. It's just even though it'd be nice to call the rules, we know it's not going to happen, but call the obvious ones, and they don't sometimes. And that's, I think, where Oilers fans get frustrated and where McDavid gets frustrated. And then you see things like that happen tonight. So it's kind of it's a really tough situation, because when you're that good and you're that fast, it's going to happen. Okay, let's switch gears. Before we do that, just a quick reminder for anybody who's watching and listening, there's a few ways that you can get some of the content from the Hockey Raiders. Morningskate.io is a newsletter that we do. You guys can sign up for that one on the website. Go to hockeyraiders.com, check out the YouTube page. We even have a hockey lounge on Discord you can check out. So there's lots of ways to get a hold of us if you want to talk Oilers or any of the other teams. So we recommend that you check it out. Julian, I'll start with you on this next one. Goaltending. It's a huge issue in Edmonton right now, not necessarily because the goaltending is terrible, but when we see that first goal that Koskinen lets in tonight, it makes you think. But there's lots of talk about what the Oilers should do with. I think we've all agreed that that may not be the tandem to run into the postseason with, and we assume the Oilers are going to make it. There's names out there, and Colton, I'll ask you about a specific one because you covered one in one of your articles today. But what do you think the Oilers should do, Julian? Do you think there's a target out there that the Oilers are kind of eyeing, maybe should be looking at? And how soon is too soon to get involved in this conversation?
Well, I think that's definitely an area that needs to be addressed, but I'm just not sure when that has to take place, because this early in the season, there's so many teams that are still in the mix and still, off to good enough starts that they don't want to move any players right now. So you got to wait for those teams to kind of separate. And the teams that are at the bottom right now don't necessarily have any goaltenders of the caliber that the Edmonton Oilers are probably going to be looking for. So that's kind of the issue that I see with this whole situation. The Chicago might be one of the obvious ones to kind of target. But again, Fleury's had a little bit of issues with, already going to play Chicago. So would he want to join another team? Who knows? That's another discussion to have separately. But I kind of see a few guys that you could kind of keep your tabs on, which would probably be Korpisalo in Columbus, just because they've already extended Merzlikins. We've already talked about him going back into the off season. And I think that if you can get a little Finnish connection with Kekäläinen to take on Koskinen's contract, maybe, some Finnish favors, maybe, then you can kind of make that work. Cause I don't think, Columbus does have that cap space that they can kind of take on a contract and maybe gain an asset. So I think that's something that could be explored for sure. And then the other one I would probably keep an eye on is the Dallas goaltending situation, because they seem to have a few guys there that could be contributors right away that could jump into starting roles. I would probably look to be targeting Holtby or Ottinger. Ottinger's less likely just because he's younger. But I'd like to see the Oilers take a chance on a guy like that. Like, pay the price to get a goalie that you believe in, that's going to be the guy of the future. Take that risk and go get your guy, rather than this cycle of goalies that are, in and out. We've seen guys in like Tokarski in Buffalo and Anderson. They're making the Sabres good enough to win games, right? So I think it also comes down to, the system that has to be played and a more defensive game to kind of help those goaltenders out as well.
Yeah, I've heard those names, Korpisalo's and some guys out of Dallas being mentioned when it comes to the Oilers. The one thing that I will say, though, when it comes to those names is it depends on who you're replacing. If you're replacing Mikko Koskinen, I'm not sure I pull the trigger on that, because Koskinen's played well enough, and we know he's probably not a long-term solution in Edmonton, and then you can look at it in the summer. But if Mike Smith is still hurt and he's not coming back, and it looks like it's going to be a lengthy one, you're going to need another 1B.
100%.
Right. And I don't know that Korpisalo is any better than Koskinen. And I think Koskinen's played better than Korpisalo this year. Right. So I would stick with that. But if you're replacing Smith, I get it. Like Korpisalo, Koskinen, it's probably a decent enough tandem. It's not perfect, but it's okay. Colton, I want to ask you a question. You wrote an article about Tuukka Rask. Now, we've heard Tuukka Rask probably not signing anywhere but Boston. But Boston's got a pretty good goalie tandem already. We don't know exactly what Rask is willing to do, even though he said he'd like to stay with Boston and he's willing to sign for cheap. One, what do you make of the talk? I think that was either Chris Johnson or somebody, Matt Larkin from the Hockey News or something like that said something. But do you think there's any realistic option that Rask is even available?
Well, I think it was Chris Johnson. What he was getting at was basically what I kind of talked about as well with they have Jeremy Swayman right now, who's their young up-and-comer, and he's playing really well. He's taken over the starting role. And then they have Linus Ullmark, who they signed to a pretty hefty 4-year deal this offseason. So I just don't know, if they bring back Rask, are they going to just send their new free agent guy into the press box potentially? And maybe they will. I don't know. But it doesn't seem like right now they maybe have a ton of room for him. So and then Johnson had brought up that Rask may be willing to sign with a contender. And obviously that's the Oilers right now. They've been one of the best teams in the league this year. So I don't think he'll cost much, just being when he'll sign. And obviously if he comes back, I think he's going in with the intention of winning a Stanley Cup. So worst case, I think reach out to him and see if he's interested at all, because it costs you nothing in terms of giving up players, picks, prospects, whatever. And like I said, I think he'd be really cheap.
So my question for you is this: is it a Rask decision? Is it a Boston decision? What does that come down to? Because we know that if it's a matter of no money, he doesn't care. Boston's going to probably just pay the league minimum to keep him, even if it's a 3-headed monster. They don't care. They just don't want him going anywhere else. But if it's Rask that says, you know what, there's no room for me here, I'm never going to play, and I want to win, and if I'm not playing on this team, even though you have a shot, let me look at my options. Is that what has to happen first? Will Rask have to go, you know what, I appreciate it, and I'm grateful that you guys are willing to keep me here, but this doesn't work for me?
Yeah, I even think maybe it seems crazy just because of how long he's been there and how good he is, but I just don't know if maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they would absolutely bring him in. I just don't know if there's a huge fit right now. And things can change drastically. He's not supposed to be ready until at least January. So there could be an injury there. Swayman's play could drop off. But if it continues like this, I just think maybe they wouldn't have a ton of room. And like you said, even if there's the 3-headed monster there, I think if he comes back at this point, there's another thing they're saying he's coming back and hoping to still play for Team Finland in the Olympics. So if he wants to do that, obviously he's going to want a lot of playing time before to prove to them that he's good to go. So I just think, again, reaching out, there's no harm in just seeing where his head's at.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Matthew, what do you make of the Oilers goaltending situation? If you're on the outside looking in, I mean, we see it up close, so we know what we think is kind of but the reputation for the Oilers is that their goaltending has let them down in the last 2 series of the playoffs, which is one of the main reasons they haven't contended. Is that the case? Do people still look at this Oilers team and go, you know what, your goaltending is your biggest problem?
Yeah, I mean, I've always in the past I've always said that it's the Oilers are being held back by their goaltending and their defense. Their defense has gotten better, goaltending not so much, and I think they do need to address it. To your point, I don't know if Korpisalo is like his stats aren't better than Koskinen, so I don't know if that's an upgrade unless he gets on a roll like he did in the playoffs for Columbus, getting on and playing that ridiculous game in overtime and all that stuff. So, I mean, he could be a guy that could get hot and ride him in the playoffs. So you never know, right? But I mean, guys like Holtby, even in Vancouver with Halak, I mean, if the Canucks are, I'm sure they'll be looking at moving him as well.
Yeah, we'll take Halak, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, Halak hasn't looked. I mean, he's looked good. The Canucks just haven't given him any run support in any of the games. So I think they've scored 1 or 2 goals whenever he's in goal. So it's not a good, that. But I mean, he's still a really good goaltender. I think the Canucks probably maybe move him. Again, I'm not sure he's an upgrade on if you're replacing Koskinen with him too. So yeah, it's something I think the Oilers need to look at. As it gets the goal, to the deadline. I'm not sure you do it now because, like you said, Julian, it's a lot of teams aren't going to be giving up these guys yet because no one's way out of it unless you're Arizona. Arizona is the only one that really can say, we're done. So, and
we've seen teams
maybe
stock up. We've seen teams start to stock up 3 goaltenders deep to make sure they're good for any injuries that happen. Right? Who knows what happens down the road, and it's hard to tell now how things are going to shake out 5 months or 4 months from now, right?
Yeah, kind of wish we had Brian on the show because he's such a big Stuart Skinner guy, and
he'd be.
It's really hard to tell what Stuart Skinner is, right? Because he's been in for 2 games and in the third period today. And talk about Matthew, guys have been hung out to dry. The Oilers have been hanging out their goalies all year. It's just I think what are they? I don't know what the average is, but it's got to be 33 shots a game against the goalies. Yeah. It's crazy. Is the amount of shots the Oilers are giving up. Now I know Tippett has said, some of those shots are like turnovers. They're so pointless and don't mean anything, but it's still a lot of shots. And you don't know if Skinner is really quite good because he's been facing so many shots and he's lost both of the games that he's in. But he could be something.
So quickly here, the Oilers are 5th in the league in shots allowed per game played at 33.6.
Well, it's close.
There you go. Yeah, right.
What did I say? 33.
33.
That was just a guess, by the way.
Yeah. So they're top. They're 5th most right now in the league.
Yeah. Well, that's a problem. It's a problem for sure because the Oilers, as much as their defense has improved, it's not good enough to be giving up 33 shots a game. And maybe because of the fact that the Oilers are kind of offensively minded when it comes to their blue line, that could be one of the reasons they're giving up so many shots a game. But they just we saw it tonight. They're just leaving these guys out. Like when Skinner comes in for his first game and you're like, let's do us a favor and let's give Skinner our best effort. And then they just completely it was 9-1 in the first 5 minutes of the game. It's holy crap, you guys, let this guy have a room to breathe for a second, right? They just tend to do this to these guys all the time. So, and Koskinen got pulled out of mercy tonight because it wasn't really his fault, although the first one was ugly. But yeah, just kind of a mess. All right. Well, final comment before we close things off. Matthew, I'll start with you. Oilers are 10-3 now? Is that the record? This is the first real sort of losing stretch that they've had. It's not even a stretch so much, but say they went on the road, played 5 games, come back with a losing record. So they're 2-3. Is it enough of a wake-up call to go, you know what? Okay, something isn't right there. That wasn't the best road trip we've ever had. Or is the 10-3 record still kind of you know what? This is pretty decent.
I think you look at what just happened. I mean, you got to have a memory of what a recent play, because the thing is, it can snowball pretty quickly when you start. You may have gotten away with it early on, getting wins, but bad defense and bad goaltending piles up, and you can't just think, oh, we're 10-3, we're fine. It can go and spiral into your 10-10, in no time, right? So.
Yeah. Colton, we talked about how important this road trip could be. Remember, we talked about the Calgary Flames and how they performed really, really well. I think they went like 5-0 and then 6-0 with their first win at home after that too. And it was a big moment for them. It put them near the top of the Pacific Division. The Oilers did not have that. We said, you know what, if the Oilers could do something similar, that'd be fantastic. It did not turn out that way. Do they come home now and they look at this and go, man, we really pooped the bed on an opportunity here? Or do they go, all right, we have some things to fix up, but it's not that big of a deal?
Yeah, I think the second point there, that it's nothing to, I think, really hit the panic button about, but there are really some things to work on, especially the even strength play, like I talked about earlier. I think that's really the big thing that, like, obviously they put themselves in a good spot, right, with all these wins early on, but they can't just hang their hats on that. They have to still look to improve, because we talked about it, like with the penalties in the playoffs, those penalties aren't going to happen nearly as often. So it comes down big time to even strength play, and that hasn't been good enough yet. And if that continues by the time it is playoffs, it could be another short exit for them. So they really have to figure that out here.
Julian, we saw a lot of line juggling here with Tippett over the last little bit. Like they moved Ryan McLeod up to the third line and put Derek Ryan on the fourth line. We've seen Leon with Connor and then not with Connor. So we sense maybe that Tippett's kind of like, man, I got to figure this out. I got to find the right combination of people. Zach Kassian was back in the lineup, but he went away from the Derek Ryan, Kassian, Fogle line tonight and did not play them together. What do you think the deployment here is now? Like, have they figured anything out? Has Tippett kind of said, you know what, okay, this is my group, or are we going to continue to see this for a while until the Oilers have a really strong game where they play a full 60 minutes?
I don't know what to make of these lines. I think he switches them all too much. I'm a guy who likes to have the lines as, you know, a well-balanced line and kind of run with it as long as you can. And unless there's any real need to change it, which I haven't seen a real need, you know, why change something that if it's working, right? And we've seen them already win a bunch of games, but he's been constantly changing lines. Maybe it's his way of keeping everybody fresh and you know, reliable and on their game and just keeping everybody, you know, on their toes basically. But for me, I like having that chemistry develop and keeping that line together, and you know your role, and it helps establish those players, and they go in every game knowing what they need to do, and gets them into a routine. So I think that's the way I think. Tippett clearly is on a different page than I am. And I think we're going to keep seeing this, and he plays a very matchup based, and it all depends on the game flow. And I think that's kind of what he goes off of and what he judges when he makes these line changes. I think that this was a good reality check on this road trip for the Oilers that they kind of needed to see that, okay, you know, maybe we got to batten down the hatches here and let's work on our defensive game and our all around game and put in a complete effort. And I think we're going to see that next game against the Winnipeg Jets. So I think it'll be, even if they don't win, it'll be a very complete game that they play, and they're going to play a full 60.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it. They got a home and home, so they're playing Winnipeg again with an opportunity to kind of right the wrong here. They did not have a good game. This might have been their worst game of the year. Now, they had a stretch there at the beginning of the third when they got 2 power plays and they scored real quick. Draisaitl got 2 like in a matter of seconds, but that was really it. There wasn't a whole lot else going on during this game. So the Oilers will have a chance to kind of make it right when they play Winnipeg again. So we'll see how that one goes. But we'll call it for this week. We appreciate Matthew joining us for the first time. Thank you for filling in and helping us out. Julian, as always. Colton, as always. Just a quick reminder, everybody, you can check out thehockeyraiders.com, morningskate.io if you want to join the newsletter, the YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and, of course, Twitter as well. So we appreciate you guys joining us on the Hockey Raiders for another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. My name is Jim Parsons, and we will talk to you guys next week.